All right, it's 6:30. Guess we'll get started. I've disabled the waiting room, so hopefully everyone, as the program really kicks off, will be able to get in. We can start right on the dot, but thank you all for being very punctual. Um, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Rachel Robinson. I am the director of the Sudbury Historical Society, and I've been working with Jane on getting this book published. So exciting that it's finally here. Um, and so we've been working together for a little over a year, year and a bit.
Longer.
It's time time is time is a mystery at this point. But this is amazing. We have so many people joining us, and I'm sorry that we can't be in person, due to the snow. But this is great that we, a little harken back to some COVID times, but that we're still able to hear from Jane and to experience her presentation. We do have the book at our gift shop, and so I'll show you a copy of it. It's uh, oop, so it's same cover you can see on the background there. Um, and they are available. So Jane will be in tomorrow for anyone who would like to swing by and buy a copy of it and get it signed and chat with Jane. Maybe if you guys want to connect a little bit more about some of the things that we she talks about tonight, get a little bit more in person. That would be wonderful, and we'd love to see you there tomorrow. So I'm going to hand this over to Jane, and I'm so excited for everyone to hear what she has to say.
Well, thank you, Rachel. And I have to tell people thank you for attending. First of all, glad you didn't have to go out in the weather, although it didn't quite turn out to be the cataclysmic storm it was forecasted. But this is a milestone for me because this is my first program since the book came out. So that's one thing that's new. And the other is that some of you might know that I've given literally hundreds of talks throughout the years. And yet this one is distinctive because none of my other talks were about me. And so this one is highly personal and therefore different to me. So, and I'm here to thank Rachel because I think without her help, I would not have had this book published. She actually sent it to History Press without my knowledge, and guess took the tension out of that. She's also written the foreword, which is wonderful, and she has helped me with graphics, and I have been very welcomed across over the river, and I don't know if through the woods or not, but I have been very welcomed in Sudbury and very appreciative of all the help that I got. So, the first slide uh, now is the book um, cover, and it is coupled. So the book cover is the name of the book is the Puritan Enslavement in the Puritan Village, the Untold History of Sudbury and Wayland, Massachusetts. And for those of you who don't live here, it is the period of enslavement is when Sudbury and Wayland were one town. So I'll talk more about that later. So I've coupled the book cover with a quote by one of my favorite people, Lydia Mariah Child, whom I have admired and studied for many years. She is arguably the most famous person who ever lived in Wayland, nationally known. And she is the first quote in the introduction to the book, nationally known in the 19th century, while largely unknown uh, in her hometown now. I hope that changes. Uh, she has been elected to the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls and is one of the few white faces at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Author, abolitionist, champion of human rights, Child lived in Wayland for 27 years of her life. She is buried along with her husband David at the North Cemetery in Wayland. And the quote is, "While we bestow our earnest disapprobation on the system of slavery, let us not flatter ourselves that we are in reality any better than our brethren in the South. Thanks to our soil and climate and the early exertions of the Quakers, the form of slavery does not exist among us, but the very spirit of the hateful and mischievous thing is here in all its strength." So that quote comes from Child's groundbreaking book, An Appeal in Favor of That Class of Americans called Africans, in which she addressed both slavery and prejudice toward persons of color. And although by 1833 Massachusetts claimed no enslaved persons or enslavers, Child did not have to look far into the past to uncover them right where she lived. And so the next slide, I will read a passage from the book to illustrate this point. And it is perhaps fitting that, so this is comes from the book, it is perhaps fitting that the first documentation of an enslaved person in colonial Sudbury is a record of unspeakable horror. It serves as a poignant reminder that all enslaved persons were subject to the will and whim of a master, regardless of the circumstances. Some were luckier than others, at least in regard to physical torment. There's a nice book that, despite its title, Sex in Middlesex, author Roger Thompson, it is a scholarly work with a very intriguing title. He combed the Middlesex County court records in this for the 1600s and the 1700s to discover this despicable act of Benjamin Crane of Sudbury toward his Negro boy in 1665. At the trial, and I'll quote Thompson, witnesses described the boys wearing a gear of wire, presumably a kind of muzzle, and that is 17th century irons that you're seeing on your screen, and a chain hobbling his feet. He had been heard screaming, "O Lord, O Lord," from a distance of a quarter of a mile off, and he had many stripe wounds, some raw, some healed, or partly healed. Contrary to what the modern reader might expect, the complaint was not brought by the Negro boy or those who witnessed his tattered back, but by Benjamin Crane, who had suffered from multiple attempts by his young slave to run away. At the trial, the constable who had witnessed the scars left by Crane's cruelty testified that he had reproved the boy for his untoward carriage to his master and returned the boy to Crane as the law required. As the constable retreated, he heard the boy's screams uh, from his next beating. Other witnesses also testified to the repeated beatings that the enslaved boy suffered from Crane, but these comments were offered to demonstrate the boy's bad character and not the despicable acts of a brutal master. And that's just one of the stories that surfaced while researching colonial Sudbury. The next slide probably is not needed for this presentation, but I'm going to do programs throughout the state, and therefore I introduce you to the Massachusetts map with colonial Sudbury marked with a red triangle near Framingham and Marlborough, 20 miles west of Boston, and the triangle represents both Wayland and Sudbury today. But the next slide is done especially for the book. So today, Wayland and Sudbury are fiercely independent communities, at least when it comes to its early history. I think it's fair to say. whose residents are largely unaware of its long ago connection. The period of enslavement, when it was legal and accepted in Sudbury, are the years in which they were one town, and therefore the book Enslavement in the Puritan Village refers to both Wayland and Sudbury and gives me what I have come to realize is a unique perspective, as that colonial world is the world I live in for much of the time. Uh, the maps were done especially for the book by Wayland's GIS coordinator, Brendan Decker, showing Wayland and Sudbury as one town. And there you have to use your imagination and see that on the east side, the end of it is the river, Sudbury River, and on the west side, on the other end. So you could put them together and you have a colonial Sudbury called Sudbury Plantation. When it was first settled on the east side of the Sudbury River, the Wayland side, in 1638, and it was incorporated in 1639. The settlement soon expanded onto the west side of the river, and one town it remained from 1639 until 1780, when it divided largely along the river, which had long posed an impediment to traveling from one side to the other at various times of the year, and was the subject of much contention between the two sides. The map represents the time period of the 1720s, when there were two parishes. So they finally decided uh, to that they would have support two meeting houses and two ministers in the one town, one on each side of the river, and that did reduce some of the conflicts. However, town meetings and town government was completely one entity. Town selectmen were the selectmen of the combined colonial Sudbury, and the officials represented both sides. And so it was very much, and they alternated uh, town meetings from one side to the other, continuing to cause a problem. So slide 5. So why is it the Puritan village? So uh, in 1964, Sumner Chilton Powell was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in his history book, Puritan Village. In it, he detailed the formation of one town as a model for the formation of many New England towns. As he explained in his introduction, one town well documented in relation to its specific origins can serve as a representative study for most New England towns until further investigation takes place. He continued, the term well documented, however, in the age of intense analysis, this is the early 60s, is a romantic one. It would be fairer to admit that one can, at best, find fragments of legal records and then make reasonable assumptions about the growth of any community, leaving many vital questions involving motivations and feelings unanswered. Most early townsmen were far too busy, he said, to sit back each evening and write journals and diaries. And this is still true today, where there are many places in the book where I have to leave many vital questions unanswered, as only scraps and remain or have been uncovered so far. That's my hope, that it's just so far. The town he chose was colonial Sudbury because of the richness of their early records. It was indeed well documented. His book is different from mine. Of course, I didn't win the Pulitzer Prize, in that it details the formation of a New England town in its earliest years, and also examines the places in England where the founders originated. Mine has a somewhat later focus, but it should be noted that even in the Revolutionary War period, the inhabitants of colonial Sudbury were the descendants of Anglo-Saxon immigrants. A number of them descended from original inhabitants of Sudbury Plantation, very much an English Puritan town. There is no mention of enslaved people of African descent in Powell's book. However, detailed records and even occasional letters and journals continued to be produced and retained long after the period Powell wrote about, and these records confirmed the presence of enslaved people in town. Like most people who grew up and were educated in the North, this is my personal experience, I never learned about the existence of slavery in places where I lived. It was, after all, a Southern phenomenon, according to the history books, and so I lived blissfully unaware of its existence in the North, in New England, and in the places where I lived and or worked. That is until I started working in Concord in 1986, and then I learned the truth. Required reading for docents. Uh, I first worked at the Old Manse, was The Minutemen and Their World by Robert Gross, written for the bicentennial. He wrote about the existence of enslaved persons in Concord at the start of the American Revolution. Even men who stood up for their rights as Englishmen on April 19, 1775, at the North Bridge in Concord and on Lexington Green and throughout the Battle Road were depriving others of their freedom. And so I learned about enslaved persons who lived in Concord at the start of the American Revolution. So that was step one. After becoming a historical interpretive park ranger at Minuteman National Historical Park in 1990, I learned even more. At some point, I saw a book for sale at the North Bridge Visitor Center, republished by Vanity Press and for a paperback, quite expensive. That means it was over $30, by the way. So slide 6 features that book. It's had different covers throughout the years. I think I've uh, worn out. So if you want to advance the slide, thank you. Recording in progress. So it was Lorenzo Green's The Negro in Colonial New England, first published in 1942 by a Black professor of history at Lincoln University in Missouri. It is not an overstatement to say that that book changed my life. Always drawn to stories of people overlooked in traditional history books, it opened a new world to me. I had to know more. How could I have not known about something that happened where I lived and worked that I considered vital to my understanding of the world that was? And I should add that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, few tours or programs in the North made mention of enslavement, or in the few cases that did, it was primarily about runaway slaves who escaped from the South in the 19th century. Reeling from my new acquaintance with the existence of enslavement in the North, gleaned from Professor Green's book, I still had little understanding of its magnitude and meaning. Certainly it had not happened in Wayland, where I had already lived for 20 years now, over 50 years, or I would have heard of it. And not just what we know today as Wayland, but as I noted earlier, modern Sudbury, since they were, as I have previously explained, one town from 1639 to 1780. This is the period covered in my book when enslavement was accepted and legal and a part of everyday life in Massachusetts. I should have known before I did. Hudson's History of Sudbury, first published in 1889, for example, devotes one page out of over 600 pages to servants, by which the author meant slaves, but it did not register. I now know that servants was the preferred term used by the Puritans for all those who served, including slaves. Even ministers were servants of God. It is an unsettling experience to think about slavery in the town one lives in. It must be processed mentally and emotionally, if it is processed at all. I had studied enough history to want to process it, even though I firmly believed, as I said before when I first started, that I would find nothing at all in local records, or they would have appeared before. Uh, I started to read all the history books I could find that focused on enslavement in the North and New England in particular. No published histories included colonial Sudbury in their list of communities that had been studied, even though I discovered that there was ample evidence in existing documents that slavery existed in Sudbury. Perhaps this is speculation. Perhaps it is the nearness to Concord, which is on the same river, founded three years earlier, that made it less appealing to scholars. And by the way, at least one enslaved man had ties to that community, as the stories of enslavement in Sudbury go beyond the borders of one town. So when I retired from the Park Service in 2017, I looked at all the information I had gathered over at least 20 years and tried to figure out what to do with it. I now had many references to enslaved people in colonial Sudbury gleaned from years of research. Even better, I now had the time to add to the research. I could pursue stories that I had only noted before. The availability of digital materials was a revelation to me. My 25 years of research spanned a revolution in technology, from microfilm to digital scanned images, from in-person appointments at research facilities to instant gratification of requests for information sent right to my email inbox. I could read out of print books through Internet Archive and Google Books. This was a bonanza. During the pandemic, online resources became my main source of information. My requests for information and questions led to copious scanned documents arriving on my computer. Of special mention are Caitlin Jones at the Mass Archives and Nathaniel Smith, archivist for the town of Concord. But first and foremost, and that takes center stage in any research of colonial Sudbury, are the incomparable Sudbury Archives, which provided an online searchable database of approximately 15,000 town records dating from 1639 to 1850, and only included Wayland up to 1780. uh, Started in 1991 by the town of Sudbury as an early endeavor to make town records available to the public. The Sudbury Archives has been greatly expanded and continues to be so. Many of these records were available to search in paper form when Sumner Chilton Powell did his research for Puritan Village, but the ease of access today is a treasure beyond compare for someone investigating the town's history. I could now go back and add to my research. I could pursue stories that I had only noted before, all of it without leaving home. When I could once again make in-person visits, I had a chance to check some of my findings by viewing the originals, when only transcriptions had been available online. And while you can't teach an old dog new tricks, they say, you can achieve the unimaginable if you care enough to persevere and have children and grandchildren to turn to for guidance. Writing the book was one journey, and the technological revolution was yet another one. Never before published, these stories from preserved records highlight the lives of men, women, and children held in bondage. The accounts of life in colonial Sudbury and their interactions with nearby towns, including bills of sale, uh, marriages, medical and military records, expand the knowledge of enslavement and its pervasive impact, yet unquestioned acceptance in Sudbury and similar pre-revolutionary New England villages. And after all that, I decided that perhaps I should write a book. The book consists of several sections, with the most satisfying being stories that can be told at least with some insight into the lives of enslaved persons and their masters. For that, I have mainly Reverend Israel Loring to thank. And so the next picture will be familiar to Rachel, of course, and to many of us. It is the Loring Parsonage, now the home of the Sudbury History Center and the headquarters for the Sudbury Historical Society. And Reverend Loring was Sudbury's minister for 66 years, from his arrival in town in 1706 until his death in 1772. His copious journals cover most of the 18th century, when owning slaves, as I said, was legal and accepted in Massachusetts. More than any other records, his entries give a human face to the men and women he enslaved and those who were enslaved by others. His words bring to life those who occupied a nether world between property and personhood, in which glimpses of personalities emerge. And so the next slide is an excerpt from Reverend Loring's journal. And records that breathe life into an enslaved person are few and far between, but those that do are priceless. In his journals, and I put the original journal, which I've read a number of times, so you could feel sorry for me, because they are not easy to go through, and they are on the Sudbury archives, so you can find them there. So in his journals, we get some insight into the world of his enslaved boy, Simeon, and another one who I talk about extensively in the book, Nero Benson, a member of Loring's West Side Church, as they take on vivid but still elusive personalities, leaving you craving for more knowledge and understanding of their lives. And so here is the entry on Simeon. It's just a small sampling of the journals that I read. These are two things, and there's many other references to Simeon in the journals. There are two things we learn about Simeon, even in this very small passage: where he was born at the Loring Parsonage, and that he had a mother who had never been mentioned before, who was present in his life, and that was announcing his death in May of 1755. Coupled with other entries about Simeon until his death at the age of 21, shortly after he was emancipated, this gives a glimpse into Simeon's life and that of his enslaver and family. And what's saddest of all is, thus far, there is no documentation of words by someone who had been enslaved in Sudbury, and very few documentations anywhere except the ones that are very well known. Uh, if I had to wish for some new information surfacing, that would be it. Currently, there are no written record that reveal the thoughts and perspective of the enslaved persons on the events detailed in Loring's journals or any other sources. And most of the, however, this was the exception, Loring's journal, uh, but most of the existing records are impersonal, providing little or no insight into the lives of the enslaved, highlighting that person's value as property. Despite this, they can still offer up a few clues that can add to a greater understanding of enslavement. And so the next slide will show the 1754 slave census, and they are, uh, and this is conducted while we were still a British province by Royal Governor William Shirley. And there are 9 males and 5 females were enumerated, giving no names of either the enslaved or their enslavers. This no doubt reduces the total number that report by excluding children in bondage. For example, even this census contains a noteworthy fact. Anyone under the age of 16 did not need to be counted. So enslaved children were often excluded in census and valuation records as they were not considered, and this is my take on it, they were not considered to be as productive workers as adults. Sometimes an upper limit was stipulated, as in the 1771 valuation, which included servants for life, euphemism for slaves, and that was only those between the ages of 14 and 45. Enslaved persons below or above these ages were not considered to be in their prime work years, and their enslavers were not taxed for them. The names of the enslavers appeared, but not those of the enslaved. And then the next one is a really rare document in Sudbury, and that is the emancipation of Nero Benson. And this is just a transcription. Uh, which offers a rare glimpse at another kind of record, and it is the only documented reference to an enslaved man who lived in Sudbury being given his freedom. What is most remarkable to me is that while it is largely impersonal, you know there is a great story contained in this act. What motivated Samuel Wood, the master, to free Nero Benson at considerable cost to himself. He had to give the town of Sudbury 100 pounds, and only 50 pounds was required by provincial law, and save the town, and this is a quote, said town harmless from all or any charge towards the support and maintenance of Nero Benson. Nero Benson's freedom had to come with a guarantee that the town would never bear any expense for his care. I talk about this in much greater detail in the book, but equally intriguing and frustrating that I don't know them are the qualities that Nero Benson possessed that led to his freedom, especially since Wood had at least one other slave. And the next is a probate inventory, another sort of impersonal record. And it is, as I said before, most enslaved people were referred to as servants. So that, do we have slide 11 is there? It's like, I can't see it. Which was favored by the Puritans over the word slaves. This poses difficulty to a modern researcher in determining status. When a value is assigned, as it is in this inventory, there is no doubt that that person is regarded as property and is owned. Enslaved persons were often listed in inventories with the livestock. That was their usual placement. Simply stated, you are looking at a slave. Cato was worth 53 pounds. 6 shillings 8 pence, the same as when Jonas Noyes bought him from his father, Colonel John Noyes, in 1767. And that sale document also still exists in the Wayland Historical Society. And now the next person that I'll mention and touch upon is Reverend Samuel Parris. So he was another Sudbury slaveholder who left an enslaved person named Violet in his will. He was known as a slaveholder in his former home in Salem Village in 1692, where the witchcraft troubles originated in his own house, which is probably why you recognize his name. There is no mention of his, and Tituba, along with it, has come down in history, but there is no mention of Tituba in Sudbury. But there has been speculation as to Tituba's relationship to Violet. Violet was left to Paris's son Samuel, along with some books, a silver seal, an agate case of knives, a horse, and a colt. And Middlesex County probate records are well preserved, accessible online, and a great resource for identifying enslaved persons. And the last document I'll talk about is Frank Benson's Bill of Sale. And a bill of sale is a property deed transferring, pure and simple, transferring ownership from one enslaver to another for a monetary amount. The story of Frank Benson is one that crosses into other nearby towns. Born in Framingham, bequeathed to John Swift, minister of Acton, in his father's will. His father and also named Reverend John Swift, was the first minister of Framingham. And Frank, just to complicate his story, was also known as Francis uh, Benson, and he was soon sold by Reverend Swift of Acton for £200 to Josiah Richardson, a prominent citizen of Sudbury. This deed, owned by the Goodnow Library in Sudbury, yielded another surprise and it was missing for many years. It couldn't be located, but it finally was, and I was happy to see it. So that on the reverse side was a commentary by Thomas Stearns, who collected Sudbury town documents. He added a handwritten note on the reverse side. Both sides of the document are featured in the book, containing the following sentence: how any man, this is Thomas Stearns speaking, how any man professing to be a minister of Christ could be guilty of the atrocious crime of trafficking in human flesh is inconceivable to us at the present day. Stearns died in 1844 when slavery was flourishing in America and ministers owned slaves, but not in Sudbury. And the last slide is a sort of extra bonus, and thanks to Doug Curry of Sudbury Historical Society, who's also a member of Wayland Historical Society. It has a prominent place in the book, and it looks much different than the slide that I submitted, which was just really from my notes. So the appendix contains a timeline of enslavement in Sudbury, and I think there is a slide for it, um, listing all references. There it is. That's my scribbles, but it looks much different in the book, that contain documentation of enslavement and even extends beyond the years that slavery was legal in Massachusetts, and for which there was not enough information to fit into the text, but considerably heightens the impact of enslavement in Sudbury because there's just pages and pages of references. And I included in the book sources, notes, and hopefully hopefully, and this is my hope, that not only was I writing a book, but I was also telling you what has not been discovered yet. And these are brief mentions, but you'll see by the length of the pages of this appendix that there are quite a few of them. And I think, and hopefully new documentation on enslavement in Sudbury will surface. So on that, I think I'll stop. I thank you and looking forward to questions, comments, whatever. Um, Rachel, take it away, I guess.
Well, thank you so much, Jane. That was fabulous. Um, I am really sorry about all the orange marks. I really have no idea where they've come from. Um, I don't know why they're there. So, anyways, but just ignore them. Um, so, if anybody wants to ask Jane any questions specifically, if you could put them into the chat and then I can read them, perfect. And uh, so, somebody said, intriguing that the term trafficking is so old. Do you have any uh, where that might have come from, or like why? I guess why trafficking was the word that was used.
I don't know. Did I use the word trafficking? I don't think so.
Hmm. Was it on one of the
I mean,
documents?
it would be the sales, certainly. Um, Slaves were liable to be sold, and many of them were. And so I would consider that trafficking.
I said yes when. Oh, sorry. Just said yes when you were reading the comment in the back of the document. You said trafficking. So, do you have any idea of when enslavement ended in Sudbury?
Okay, the last documented reference I have to it is a Negro girl, actually it was spelled, sold to Ezekiel Howe at Rev War inflationary prices in 1779. And looking at some of the wills of known slave owners in the 1780s and even in the first part of it, um, when they died, the slave owners did not list an enslaved person. So I would say that realistically, certainly the war played, which I'll discuss in the book, played a significant part in the ending of enslavement in Sudbury and many other places as well. But the documented last reference that has surfaced so far is 1779. And as I say, unusual in that the prices during the Revolutionary War were incredibly inflationary, and yet he bought this little Negro girl, as the deed says.
Um, are all of the enslaved people you researched from Africa, any indigenous people or others?
Okay, I have not documented any indigenous enslavement. So they were African or African American. And that isn't to say they didn't exist, but I have also, discussed this with scholars, and I they cannot, there is no specific documentation. I wouldn't be surprised, certainly in the early years of the Sudbury plantation when it was more common that there may have been enslaved indigenous people, but the book, I cannot document any, and therefore I will say that I haven't been able to document any, and therefore they are not included in the book. I hope someday maybe there will be some documentation that could add to the African American story.
In the second edition. Um,
Not by me, though. I'm too
uh,
old.
um, Jane, what are you going to do next? What is the next layer for you?
Well, it's like having a child, and I know it's grown up now, but I still would love to find more documentation, and certainly so much more has surfaced through the years. But what I really love to see is somebody who could carry on not just the story of Wayland and Sudbury, but also just a place where all references to enslavement in various towns in especially Massachusetts and maybe parts of New England. Of course, you're including Maine and Massachusetts at this time, that there is a central place where people could tap into this resource and compare notes and see what is similar and what is different about different communities. And I also have to say I do make a point in the book of distinguishing between rural enslavement as we saw in Sudbury and Wayland, and it's very different dynamic in Boston and seaport towns. So that's very different, but I do, as I say, I do touch upon that in the book, that it is a different kind of enslavement.
Um, Historic New England has done similar research on their history of some of its properties, their owners, and enslaved people. Did you use similar techniques in your research as Historic New England did?
I used anything I could get my hands on. I don't know what, I mean, wills and I don't know the specific question. Maybe if you repeat it, I'll be able to answer it better.
Um, I have a census of residents in my town that lists a slave in one household in the 1700s. How would you recommend I find out more information?
Well, vital records are good. Certainly probate records. I love probate records. I love church records. Um, eh, Town meeting records. There's just so many resources. You're probably not going to get much of a story, but at least you might be able to pinpoint something about the person, and then you can take it from there. But be prepared for the fact that um, the main frustration in doing all this is that there is stories you just can't complete. Hopefully, it's in somebody's attic and they'll find it after 200 years. But the fact is that it's fragmented, that you only know so much of the story. And that is really the biggest disappointment, that you know there's a story, but you just can't find as many pieces as you might want to put it together. So there are stories here, but some of them are unfinished stories, and that is sad. And as I say, hopefully documentation will surface in the future that has not surfaced now.
Um, did some cases of did some cases of indenture border on kind of legal slavery?
That wasn't, I didn't do indentured white people. It was usually for a specific time. It wasn't servants for life was certainly the realm of for Black people and not for white indentured people. And to me, that makes a lot of difference, that there was hope that you could have a future, whereas being enslaved, you were completely and totally always at the mercy of the master.
Um, and then Simeon's grave, which Ellen has kindly posted in the chat, was an unusual Sorry, was this unusual for a slave to have such a grave?
I think it was unusual because I cannot pinpoint graves. You have Portsmouth in at the Wayside Inn, and part of the stipulation was a Christian burial. And I have no doubt that he had a Christian burial, but at the moment, and presumably it might be somewhere on the property of the Wayside Inn, but the exact location has not been designated. So. Yes, was it unusual? I think it was Simeon. And there's a whole story about Simeon and why it might have been unusual.
Uh, did you encounter any discussion of pensions for emancipated former slaves or any type of reparations in your research?
No, and the people that I studied that were black enslaved, black people who enlisted in the Revolutionary War in Sudbury um, were not given they either didn't live long enough or whatever happened. They did not get pensions. So yes, did I look into it? Yes.
There's a reference to Jamaica on Draper's 1776 map. Were you able to figure out what that referred to?
So, and I'm very familiar with it. And yes, we have gone, the Wayland Historical Society has agonized and tried to find this. And so far, unless somebody else has discovered it since I've been as active at the Wayland Historical Society, but at the moment it's just uh, not identified the origin. I'd love to know it if that's what you want to ask.
Okay. Um, Maria says, I think it's better to share the little bits you discovered than to dismiss these threads and say we don't know enough to talk about it. Um, okay. If there's any other questions, um,
I've talked about what I could and also made it very obvious to everyone what I feel needs more research if and when the documents surface. I would love to see them.
mm, okay. All right, so that's it for questions, unless anybody else has anything else that they would like to ask. Um, no? Anything else? All
So do
right.
you want what? Go ahead.
No, that's if there's any, yeah, if you have anything else you'd like to add,
I
Jake?
just wanted to ask a time if I come tomorrow, which I'm happy to do, if
Hmm.
there's a, a time that
Oh,
works for most
I said from
people or that you,
11:30 to about 2, if that's workable.
okay,
So
that's
yep, we do have
fine
the
with me.
books. They did come. I know there was a little touch and go there, but they did arrive this week. So we do have them available. Um, and we'll hopefully see you tomorrow. Hopefully the walkway to the museum is shoveled and not icy. It can get a little hectic there. Um, and we hope to see you all in tomorrow.
And I also like to add that if you do come and you haven't been to the Sudbury History Center, it is well worth coming for more than just having me sign a book or buying a book. It is also a beautiful exhibits that, and some of them really are very kind of bring home the whole concept of the period of time that I refer to in the book.
Yes, we would love to see you in the galleries and learning a little bit more
Yes,
about
yes, yes.
Sudbury when it was Wayland and Sudbury today. Um, so thank you all so much for joining us again. I you know stay safe, everyone out there. Stay warm. Um, Sorry we couldn't be in person, but it's better that we're all safe and no accidents. We don't want that. No one slipping on the walkway. So thank you all so much,
And
and we
thank you.
will hopefully see you all soon. So, and thank you, Jane. Thank you. Your research is invaluable. So it really, really adds a lot.
Thank you.